make it happen. Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the show. Welcome to What You Don't Hear. I almost said one of my other show names because I've been recording several other shows lately.
Jeez.
But this is a 15-minute Friday. I am sitting down.
It's like you're on a date and you call the person the wrong name.
Literally.
I've never done that.
What's so funny is I thought about that earlier today. And I was like, oh, man, all right, I got to remember. It's What You Don't Hear, What You Don't Hear, 15-minute Friday.
I did that once, actually, in high school.
To a person?
Mm-hmm.
Really? I've never done it to a person.
I'm not telling the story on the record, but
we can save that. That can be that can be an after the pod thing, or you can just directly ask them. But yes, this is a 15-minute Friday. You know what you clicked on. You know what you're here for. You know the name of the show, while I might be getting confused with several of the other shows that I do at this point. We're nailing this one down, and we're going to do a 15-minute Friday. Adam, thank you so much for being back on the show.
My pleasure.
I am going to get our timer ready because, of course, we are going to talk for around 15 minutes. But this episode, we are talking about the topic of the importance of creativity and entrepreneurship and the support of those things and all of that. The importance of that to a city. Yeah. And, of course, we're probably going to talk a lot about, like, the examples are going to be Columbus as the city and all that sort of stuff, but as a city at large. Yeah. So we're going to start the timer, and I would love for you to just kind of take it away, because why was this a subject that you wanted to talk about? Why did you bring this up?
Well, I brought it up because I asked some of my friends, what do I talk about all the time when they don't ask me to talk? Like, what do I just start talking about? And this is one of the topics that comes up all the time.
Okay.
And so I have an odd background. I grew up on a farm in a town of less than 1,000 people. I came from a small town, actually a small town, not like a suburb of a big town, like an actual small town.
Same, yeah.
I drove my tractor to school. I like things like that. So city life, like an urban environment, wasn't something I ever really was around. Population density wasn't something that I was that familiar with until later in life. And so, but what was interesting to me as I started to travel more and experience different places is the parts of it that I thought were really interesting. And it wasn't like, oh, there's a lot of jobs here, there's an office building, or there's all these other things. Those are what bring people to a place for jobs and work and opportunity, but they're not what make the place special. It's not what anyone remembers. And when I moved to Columbus, I don't think many people across the country probably aren't thinking Columbus, Ohio is this really powerfully creative city or things like that. But I learned that's where I met people, and that's where I took my friends when they would come visit me. I moved to Columbus in 2008, right after recession, and it was not Columbus's peak, probably like somewhere right before then and somewhere after probably it had peaked. And it wasn't it was just an odd kind of time. And the places I would take folks were the places that did things with some kind of artistry, which we now understand, like every cool restaurant needs to have an Instagram wall. You know, when people are trying to like change a neighborhood, they put murals everywhere. Like they know cities have learned to do these things, but those were a lot less common at the time. They weren't just best practices at the time. And so the importance of that, I think is kind of the reason I like to talk about it is kind of twofold, is we watch developers or people who own huge buildings use artists as a gentrifying mechanism.
Yeah.
Right? Where artists get kind of used in that way to help property values go up or to make people want to come somewhere. And I think as artists, sometimes I watch artists or creative people in general miss the power that they have in that little brief window of being really important to an area. And once the area is developed and once that's part of, once the city is running, it doesn't much need that artist that much anymore. New York needed artists at one point, and now artists need New York. If you want to go do that, you need to be there. You need New York to support you and take hold of you and kind of like bring you into its art system. Mm-hmm. At one point, Brooklyn needed its artists to make Brooklyn cool. because Brooklyn wasn't cool or whatever that means, you know?
Right.
And so there's this moment in that people with a lot of power or people with a lot of who want to change an area use artists to bring and draw people there because there's something interesting about it. And I don't just mean artists like painters. I mean artists like graphic designers, photographers, videographers, DJs, chefs, baristas, bartenders, like people who do craft and make things of interest. And so I it's obvious, and people bemoan this in public, right? They get mad about it. They'll be like, "Oh, we're putting up murals. We're just here to gentrify stuff." And I was like, I think artists have a lot of power in this little window, and I would like it if they would take it a little bit more than they do, take advantage of it, or to realize that they're powerful and demand different things of the spaces they get to occupy.
Yeah. Can I interject for a second?
Yeah,
with
please
the
do.
question is, so like when you think of like what that looks like of creatives and artists and stuff like that, like making the most of that window of time and taking that power, like what does that look like? Like what is that? Is it just like making themselves more known to the city, like demanding more things? Is it like what does that?
Yeah, I think it's running their business really well.
Okay.
Is using that moment to their advantage,
Like capitalizing on the
moment,
Yeah.
and then also understanding the power that you have. Like you just have power in a particular type of way. People with one type of power, usually money or access to policy of some kind, and then you just as a creative person, like not everybody has access to power, money, but a lot of people have access to creativity or artistry in some way, shape, or form. And you don't have to come for money to get that. And so I think it's important for artists to understand how important they are to a particular place, to making that place mean or something or matter. You know, downtown Columbus just put up an art installation over part of downtown that sort of is like I don't even know how to describe it. It feels like Spider-Man got creative one night and like put webbing all through the city.
I saw
right?
a post about that. Yeah.
Which is from an artist who had done a bunch of installations, has a really cool TED Talk, like talks about all of it. But there's a lot of power in that placemaking, and that thing, that art installation being downtown makes more people want to come there, which makes property values go up, makes more people want to live down there, makes more people want to open a restaurant down there, and it sort of, this whole like cycle kicks off or is accelerated because of art. And it's a very monetarily powerful cycle that's being kicked off or accelerated. On the flip side of it, I think people, there's different parts of the city or different cities across the country that start to develop, and then they get frustrated that they become not cool anymore. They feel like the lame parts of a suburb or something like that. Like they become boring. All the chain restaurants come in, all the chain retailers come in, and just becomes like a mall, but it took up what was once had a lot of interest or intrigue to it, and it becomes just a place where a bunch of people are, and businesses can come from outside who can afford expensive rents, and they can be there. And I think city leaders and people who organize need to understand and pull in local folks to help keep things interesting. And you're watching more and more people sort of pick up on this. Here in Columbus, there's like other development. There's a lot of people who are working really hard to bring local shop owners, local restaurants, local restaurant groups, rather than having all of the chains sort of come in and swoop in everywhere, and keeping something, weird or cool or different or unique. Because in the way cities are operating right now, it would be really easy for the arts district of Austin, Texas, and the arts district of Columbus, Ohio, and the arts district of Indianapolis to kind of start to look and feel and sound the same and boring, I think. When you travel to different places and you're like, oh, this is like this coffee shop is like the one that we have over here, but just a different city with a different name and a different logo, but it's all the same thing. It's like kind of boring. And so I think that artistry matters a lot. I think it makes a place worth staying. And once a place becomes worth staying, and this is why it's important, and this is like where this is my like point. I think it is why it matters. I think artists have a lot of power. I think people with a lot of power should work with artists or creative people. And it matters because it keeps people in place for a little bit of time. It makes me want to not move somewhere else. And if I stay, it's more likely that I will meet other people who I become a community with or a network with or connected to. When I first moved here, I lived in a part of the city that had nothing cool going on. And it had a grocery store. I would go to Applebee's and watch the Cavs play. When I first moved here, I just went to chain places. And it looked like the same suburb of every other city. The places that I occupied looked the same as everywhere else. And I could have moved anywhere and had the same experience. But if you stay longer, and you've had a reason to stay longer, those places connect you, and you stay connected. And you bring other people to be like, hey, come check out when my friends come in from out of town, there's a coffee shop downtown called Parable that I hang out at a lot. And I take them there. And they're like, oh, this is different. And I'm like, it is different. It's run by artists.
Yeah.
And it's that difference is what makes a line around the door, out the door on the weekend. There's a lot of other places that sell coffee. There's a lot of other places that sell pastries. But there's a reason for people to go there. And one of the things that makes a city strong or a neighborhood or a town strong is those, what they call third places. It's not work. It's not home. It's a third place. Starbucks was one of those sort of popularized this. But the local versions of those are what really stick.
Yeah. Okay, so we're getting in our last handful of minutes already. A question that I have is like, what do you feel like the disconnect often is between like a city and the decision makers and the artists? Because I mean, I'm sure you've also seen it. Like I have seen it for sure. Been in the middle of it sometimes. Yeah. Like there is sometimes a disconnect where it's like, no, hey, we are making a really dope arts district, right? And then the artists are like, well, on your terms, but not really kind of how you're talking about, like the power sort of play. Like, what do you feel like that disconnect usually is? Is it just people sometimes out of touch with just like, wait, well, cool, the arts district can be here and just we'll make them pay a bunch of rad rent so we make awesome money and then you'll like it, right? Because you have a place. Like, what do you feel like that disconnect usually
I think is? There's two. I think I'm going to say both sides, and these aren't like a warring sides. It's just in conflict. Yeah. I think both sides don't come along with one another. And creative folks can often be like, well, this was gentrified and now I don't want to be here anymore. It's not cool anymore. I'm like, well, you made it cool. Invest in the space, in the neighborhood, in the community. Move closer to your friends and the other people who are here. I sometimes, the pandemic, when COVID set in, the city and its places of interest, it became very obvious where they weren't anymore. You're like, oh, they went away, and I don't want to live on this street anymore. I wanted to, and now I don't. And the only difference is a bunch of the places that were third places to me are gone, and they moved somewhere else. They've gone a different place. And that matters a lot. Those are where our networks is. It's I think a lot of times, I'll just say artists in general don't progress their own careers or their work or their businesses or their reach or audience in a way that keeps up with how much growth they're bringing to an area. Yep. And people who are shaping those places, it's just easier to be in a transactional relationship where like, I'm using you for a period of time. I hope you take advantage of it. You might not. Cool. Or we could say, we're actually going to grow together. And what are you trying to do? Well, cool. In 6 months, we should probably progress this. You should start to do this. Or like, do you think we can get you a house in the area? Because that would, if an artist moves into this area and works in this art building that is bringing a lot of people here. And we throw every month we have like an artist festival here, and it brings people from all the suburbs want to go to the cool art place. We should try to help those artists live there and capitalize on the value they're bringing to this area. And they might not be able to rent this building forever, but they're going to, as property values go up, which artists are making happen, they should get to experience some of the value that they're creating. Mm-hmm. But they've got to do certain things to be able to capture all of that. And I think sometimes there's like just this discomfort with being really honest about what's going on. And then 5 years later, everyone would be mad.
Yeah.
And you're like, 5 years ago, we could have just been like, this is what's going on.
Right.
We got cheap rent for a reason, you know? Yeah. And I don't know. Some people aren't interested in that, and that's fine. I just think it's obvious. It's obvious that you put murals up to help people want to come to an area, or it's obvious that you bring a bunch of artists in, do cool, weird things that don't really make fiscal sense. No one's trying to build a business around it, and those sort of things are what people want to go to. It's what they want to go out of their way for. It's what they come to on our business has put together creative events for a decade, and my mind is always blown that people come to them, people pay for them, people ask to have more of them. I'm like, oh, we just did like a weird thing because I knew 17 people who did weird stuff, and they all agreed to sort of do weird stuff together.
Yeah.
And so I think there's just it's well documented what's going on in the cities and how important creative spaces are. I think artists, creatives, bartenders, chefs, you should understand what you're bringing to an area just by doing your art in a particular place. And people who are placemaking, who are shaping those places, should understand that we don't want to bring a bunch of artists here and then drive them away because we become boring. Mm-hmm. And then being boring, and we have to bring in other artists. It just seems like a waste in a lot of ways. I just think creatives, entrepreneurs, people running their business well is really important to making any kind of place matter.
Yeah, 100%. And so we hit our 50 minutes, but if I was going to add any like final thoughts of that, I feel like a lot of it does come down to like the city decision makers need to understand that like, I do think often a lot of them are bad at looking at everything as a transaction. Where it's like, if we get this, then we get this, and like kind of like you said, sometimes the result is just the experience of in the experiment of trying, and then seeing what happens because of that.
Yeah. Not
a direct result of, well, once we get these people in, if they don't raise the income in there, the whatever in that area, well, then it was a waste, then it doesn't work. And it's like, I think that side has to not get caught up and confused on that, because we've also, when you've been on 50 Minute Fridays, talked about a lot of the outdated way of thinking of business often.
Yeah.
I think a lot of those people, especially I think decision makers in cities, are usually pretty outdated thinkers. They like to think that they're not, but I think most of the time they are.
They can be, yeah.
It's just transactional. But I also think, and you noted on this a little bit, I also firmly believe that artists, creatives, and entrepreneurs on the smaller side are really, really bad, actually, at embracing growth and change.
Yeah.
Which sounds weird because you hear of like a freelance creative who's like always doing and always evolving and blah, blah, blah. But when it really comes to like being faced with something like this of like, hey, the city might be doing this, how are you going to react? Or hey, you could be doing this or taking more of those opportunities or making more or whatever. You could be doing this. And when it shakes up their status quo of like, no, I like being in my studio in my room right now. It's been this way for 5 years. I'm just in the normal cycle and system. We do the events. We do the festivals. That's it. I do think the artists and creatives need to actually be better at embracing change and understand how almost challenging that change in their own way creates better and new opportunities. Rather than just saying, this is different than what I currently have, and because I'm an artist and I love to just go with the flow, it's shaking up my flow now, and now I'm angry. And I feel like that, like, there are ways of disconnecting, and I think there are miscommunications and misunderstandings in a situation like that on both sides. I do think both sides are often guilty of one portion is looking at it this way, the other portion is looking at it that way, and not that there's some great war, but that obviously will the artists are going to be like, why are they doing this to us? And the city people are like, why won't you just do this and make millions of dollars? I don't, there's a miscommunication there.
Yeah.
So any final thoughts that you have before we wrap this up?
It's just artists are people who are empathetic and understand how to do interesting things for an audience or their own set. Like you sort of, by being an artist, you're doing things in your own way, doing something of interest, and you're attentive. And it's like you're the nerve endings of a city a little bit, of being able to understand, oh, people don't really like that. They kind of like this. If we do something a little bit unique in this kind of way, people will like it, but it's different. We need that energy, or we're just going to be a bunch of people doing boring, uninteresting, non-human sort of things, building cities in a way that's not that meaningful, not that useful, and people will leave. Columbus is a good example. All of the most creative people that Columbus develops don't stay here a lot.
Right, yeah.
And it's annoying. You watch people do podcasts or videos or anything, and it's like I'm going to go somewhere else because the city not keeping up with me, Yep. And the city needs to keep up with these folks.
Well, someone who does pretty consistently do meaningful and cool things is you in the Wonder Jam. Yeah. So before we tell people goodbye, anything you want people to go check out?
Yeah.
Can they go check things out? I mean, I don't know. There's a pretty cool space that we're sitting in right now that might be useful to some people.
Yeah,
too,
so the Wonder Jam is a company I started 10 years ago with my wife, and we now have several different sort of subsidiaries or sister brands. And if you go to thewonderjam.com, you might find something that's for you there.
Love it. Yeah. Well, that, my friend, was another 15-minute Friday. Or, like a 20-minute Friday is probably
Ish.
15-ish minute
You and
Friday.
I have this problem.
We do, which is why the timer helps.
Yeah.
And, we try to make it within
15 minutes. We'll do better
minutes.
next time.
I think the people at this point know when they're listening to a 15-minute Friday, it is nearly always a lie.
If you listen to it at like 1.25, you'll be good.
That's true. Yeah, listen to it on kind of fast forward.
It's up to you to make it 15 minutes.
Yeah, you're in control around here. I'm just talking to people.